Along with fairies, goblins and dwarves, there is another entity which is widely known across the United Kingdom, the European continent, and beyond. In Sweden, it goes by the name of Mångubben. Russians call it Lunny Strannik, or Moon Wanderer. But in Iceland and Britain, it bears the same name, Tunglmaður The Moon Man. Usually seen at twilight on moonless nights, the appearance of a moon man carries different meanings throughout the British Isles. Along the Pennines, people trust the moon man to guide them home when they are lost. And a little further east, it is said to be in an eternal battle with the Black Shepherd, who deliberately leads people astray on the Yorkshire moors. However, in the Cotswolds, it is feared as a portent of death, while on the Sussex Downs, an encounter is thought to lead to a profound change in fortune for the witness. On the Isle of Wight, it lures smugglers and pirates onto dangerous reefs. This tale from Cornwall, dating from the 1600s, is fairly typical of coastal moonman folklore. One stormy night, a bark wrecked somewhere near what is known today as St. Anthony Head. Some survivors managed to make it to shore across the rocks and followed a moon man who led them to the safety of a local farm where the alarm was raised. Until its name was changed in the 1920s, the nearby Moon Man Inn commemorated this event. However, a story from the Isle of Wight, some decades later, describes another side to the moon man's nature. The crew of a hoy boat wrecked near Blackgang Chine also followed a moon man, with hopes of it leading them to safety. The figure was said to have a large, shining, blue-green head, but instead, the men were led directly into the arms of a notorious smuggler and his gang. Robbed of what few possessions they had, they were dragged back to the cliff edge, where one by one they were pushed into the sea. One man survived, and it was his testimony that eventually brought the gang to justice. Unraveling the many myths surrounding the Moon Man, we begin to see a pattern emerge. And within that pattern, the possibility that we are in fact observing a real creature with unusual, though not unique, physical qualities. Ethnographer and zoologist Frances Trevanian attempted to fit the Moon Man into her classification of other cryptids.
I believe the Moon Man to be a large nocturnal reptile with bioluminescent qualities. Any observed human-like behaviour is merely the result of anthropomorphizing this beguiling creature.
Many animals, plants and fungi can produce bioluminescence. The humble glowworm is a popular example. Some species of fungi that thrive on decaying wood can produce dazzling examples of what is sometimes known as fairy fire. This bluish-green glow is very similar to that described by observers of the Moon Man. Will-o'-the-wisps, thought to be produced by marsh gas under certain circumstances, also exhibit a similar color. Professor Trevanian believes such coincidences could go some way to explaining the organic nature of the Moon Man. Is the Moon Man related in some way to humans? If so, we should ask ourselves if man himself can generate bioluminescence. A case during the 1930s involved a 42-year-old patient at Pirano Hospital in northern Italy. Anna Murano produced a glow from her chest over several evenings, even when insulated inside a Faraday cage and having no access to mechanical means. A cine film was made of the light emitted by the luminous woman, a light sufficient enough to illuminate the dark room. A theory put forward by skeptics concerns the so-called Brocken spectre, a scientifically understood phenomenon whereby the shadow of a person appears under certain weather conditions as an enormous silhouette in the mist. This theory suggests that the reverse or negative image of a Brocken spectre might produce a glowing figure somewhat similar to a moon man. St. Elmo's fire, or witch fire, is luminous plasma created by an electrical discharge from a ship's mast or church spire. The phenomenon was long known by mariners, but does not manifest as spherical shapes or last long enough to be mistaken for the head of a moon man. But if these speculations do not explain the moon man's glowing head, then what else could cause it? Seen only after sunset, we can safely assert that the moon man's glow is not related to the sun. However, moonlight itself is actually reflected sunlight. The ratio of reflected sunlight is known as albedo. Our moon has a low albedo of 0.14, meaning only 1/10 of the sunlight that hits the moon is reflected back into space. On the other hand, Toro, Earth's second moon, has a higher albedo of up to 0.34. Researchers have attempted to draw parallels with appearances of the moon man and the phases of the real moon, and therefore its potential reflected light. In the 1500s, Swiss physician and alchemist Paracelsus described 4 elemental beings: salamanders for fire, sylphs for the air, undines for water, and gnomes for the earth. In his concept, these elementals fall under the influence of a creature called Lunengebunden Erdmensch, an earthbound entity with a glowing moon-like head and a black, snake-like body. There seems to be no doubt that Paracelsus, whose impact on Renaissance science was immense, believed in the moon man. The fanciful idea of aliens from other worlds traveling to our planet in flying saucers is now known to be pure fantasy. Strange lights in the night sky are easily identified as aeroplanes, satellites, hot air balloons, and fireworks. Those that are not man-made usually prove to be unusual weather phenomena. Ball lightning can occur during storms, producing glowing orbs ranging from the size of a pea to diameters several feet wide. It has been suggested that this spectacle might actually be the spawning or birth of many moon men, but the moon man itself predates UFO hysteria by hundreds of years and should not be confused with other mysterious night lights. Its glow is not seen high up in the sky, but rather at short distances away and near to the ground. Descriptions of the moon man have remained largely consistent for at least 500 years. One early reference appears in this almanac from the 1600s. Along with weather forecasts, astronomical data, tidal times, and farmers' planting dates, there is a table indicating the best nights to observe the moon man. The almanac states that the head of the moon man changes shape following the phases of the real moon. In a small village near Dartmoor, the Moon Man is still believed to be the cursed soul of a once revered guide, a man who knew the treacherous moors better than anyone. Long ago, during a harsh winter, he was accused of betraying a group of noble travelers, leading them astray into the deadly bog where they perished. As punishment for his deceit, he was banished by the village, and, according to local legend, cursed by the spirits of the dead nobles. In 1804, the small children's Big Fairy book had a character named the Moon Man, who watched over a fairy hill, protecting it from a hunting dog by transforming the animal into a flea. Scottish girls believe that seeing the Moon Man's reflection in a loch guarantees they will marry a rich and handsome man. But Irish maidens fear catching the Moon Man's light, because it means their husband will be inconstant. In 1812, Cumberland Lake Tales included a supposedly true account of a Moon Man who guided a fisherman's daughter back home after she had become separated from her family on the mountain known as the Old Man of Coniston. As well as the usual glowing head, it is described as having thin, bony limbs covered in black toad skin. Penny Horribles featured sensationalist stories about such figures as Jack the Ripper, Dick Turpin, Musket Anna, and Sweeney Todd. But in the 1850s, there was another personality who was equally popular. Tom Moon appeared in a number of Penny Horribles. He is characterized as a particularly violent type of Moon Man, who terrorizes people at night in remote parts of Britain. Known for their lurid embellishments, some of these stories are corroborated by contemporary newspaper reports. One such account concerns two ladies in Northumberland who were startled by an apparition with a head that glowed brighter than limelight at the theatre. 8 feet tall, with extremely thin limbs, covered in a metallic material, the spectre vanished as the women screamed in terror. Police were unable to trace the figure or offer any satisfactory explanation as to what it might have been. In the late 1800s, as a macabre counterpoint to the romantic images of couples sitting on a wooden moon, some Victorian photographic studios began to offer portraits with the Moon Man. A large papier-mâché head would be placed over an assistant wearing black. In some examples, husbands or lovers were included as protectors. An American crime story magazine of the 1930s featured a crime-fighting character known as the Moon Man. Detective Sergeant Stephen Thatcher adopted the disguise to fight criminals. But in Britain, around the same time, the Moon Man was to appear in a true-life crime story. When night watchman Howard Singleton strangled his lover, Elsie Home, he wrapped her corpse in tarpaulin and pushed it into a canal near railway sidings in Ipswich. His watchman's hut was close by, and he planned to ensure nobody disturbed the remains. According to Singleton's police statement, the Moon Man appeared every night after the murder, staring through the windows of his hut. The glow from the creature's head illuminated the water where Elsie's body lay hidden. Driven half-mad by the apparition, Singleton surrendered himself to the authorities, confessed to the crime, and led police to the body. During the Second World War, there was a spate of sightings of the Moon Man in Sladeburn in Lancashire. Local police were called out several times to trace a mysterious figure with a big, bright head like a lamp. At a time of mandatory blackouts, nighttime illuminations were both dangerous and illegal. Nothing was ever discovered. In 1957, a university art student claimed to have captured a Moon Man's progress in this long exposure photograph taken on Bodmin Moor in Cornwall. Skeptics claim it is simply a hiker walking with a torch. In the 1960s, British girls' comic Bexy included a cartoon strip about 3 teenage girls exposing a thief who evades detection by disguising himself as the Moon Man. Over the Christmas period in 1971, a ramblers group had become lost in the Peak District. As twilight faded, they began to follow what they thought was someone with a torch about a quarter of a mile away. It soon became clear, though, that the figure was not human. Clive Johnson was the group's treasurer.
A few of us had the impression it was walking on all fours at times. It would run quickly and then seem to rise onto its hind legs and look to see if we were still following. After a few moments, it would skit off again. We never caught up to it because it had led us back to the path we had lost. We all agreed that it was not a person had been following, but couldn't agree on what it might have been. It was just too strange.
Many primary school children across Britain now know the Moon Man from a delightful time and tune sing-along radio program.
He's a moon man, coming soon, man.
Where's Mackintosh? Asked Sally. Here he comes now, said Paul. But what's happened to the princess?
While younger television viewers excitedly follow the adventures of Mackintosh Moon Man, an animated adventurer clearly based on descriptions of the actual Moon Man.
I really hope it's fish fingers tonight, but Mackintosh Moon Man. But maybe it's the first Friday of the month, and that means cabbage. He sighed.
The Moon Man may have been appropriated by popular culture, and more of its natural habitat become exposed by electric light, making even isolated villages safe at night. But there still remain the inaccessible marshes, dark hillsides, and quiet lakes, where, in the twilight, the lone traveler may yet be comforted or terrorized by a creature whose nature and origins remain a mystery.